what he does is he lies. This is the only time he ever lies like this. He lies down flat, and he puts his front paws beside his face, and his back paws behind. And he only ever does that in church or at a prayer meeting. Anyway, you started praying, and I was still. The next minute, Buddy drops and assumes the position. And it was only after you said Amen that he got up. So I have been, there it is, that's the position. That's the praying position. So I don't know. I'm guessing dogs have a sense of the divine, as well as humans. But he taught me to some respect when praying in church this morning. Is this actually working? Oh, it is good. A few weeks ago, I was at an award ceremony for the fireys, and one of the guys with lots of brass on his shoulder comes up and he says, the rurals are having a burn out at JCU, and he gave me the date, and he said it'll be just sort of after 1. Be good if you rocked up and got to know some of the rural guys. So I went out a couple of weeks ago. Nobody there. Ring Firecom. Oh yeah, that got cancelled on account of the weather at the present time. Thank you for the cookies. That's lovely. And so I came home, and they couldn't tell me when it had been postponed to. Anyway, during the week it was advertised that they were going to be doing the burn off over JCU. So I went for a drive yesterday. I came up here to the church to do some things, and then I went for a drive out there. And they dumped a couple of their big, what do you call those things that they send halfway around the world with all your goodly possessions, cargo, shipping containers, yeah. They've got these special purpose-built shipping containers with showers, toilets, laundry, all that sort of stuff, decontamination thing, with its own supply of potable water, and that was all dumped at the scene where the staging post would be. So I knew it was on for that day, but there was still nobody there. So I got back and rang Firecom. They said, "Oh yeah, anytime after 3:30 there'll be the briefing and so on." So rocked up again at 3:30 and stuck there until quite late-ish, which is why the pastor is half asleep at the present. But it's really good. Like the rural guys are all volunteers, right? And the burning they did, they burned a section of from rubbish. First of all, they start some distance away from the road, and they burn towards the wind. So the wind's blowing it back the other way, and they're burning it into the wind, so it goes really, really slowly. And then what they do is they come back around the front, and they burn along that, but they burn with the wind so that it burns into the other lot, but it burns into the blacked out bit, and so it all burns out. And it just went like a dream. These blokes have been doing it for a while, but majority of them, there were some young blokes, but there were a whole bunch of grey-haired people like myself out there as well. And it's interesting, isn't it? This city would not work so well if it wasn't for the people who have the time and the energy to volunteer in a whole range of different things. Notice that during the flood, if it wasn't for the grey hairs and the no hairs, you know, not speaking about anybody in particular, Graham, but you know, we would have been in a lot of trouble. And it's funny, you know, even people without necessarily any faith themselves, God has put something in the heart of people that makes them want to give to the community. There's something special about giving to the community, which sometimes I have to say the folks at the local Lions Club get better than the people at the local church sometimes. I had the job of visiting a lady during the flood, and she'd been flooded out, and she'd just been able to get back into her house, and I couldn't actually get in the house because it was all sandpaper, so we conducted our conversation through one of the lounge room windows. But she'd just lost her husband the week before down in Brisbane, and she and her husband, we're talking, you know, people in their early 40s, I guess. He died of some kind of kidney condition, and just before that, they had been out at a remote sort of area, and they joined the Lions Club to get involved with the community and stuff, you know. And anyway, she rings the guys at the Lions Club at like 3 a.m. in the morning of when it was flooding, right? The next thing, she had 10 men around there sandbagging her house in the middle of the night, you know. You know what? People who say that God is not in control don't know what they're talking about. Even though, if God can use people of no faith necessarily to go and rescue people and to serve the community in all sorts of different ways, then we should not be too worried about a book of the Bible that doesn't mention God, like the one we're doing at the moment. Just because there's no mention of God doesn't mean that God's not working. He works in the hearts and minds of men and women, whether they even know it sometimes. Oh, but it was good that one of the guys that I met there last night, he was familiar with this church. He now goes to Willows Presbyterian. So there's a spattering of Christians amongst the group. But it was just wonderful to be out with these guys who, you know, I mean, they probably had better things to do on a Saturday, you know. So Thursday, we're going across to the park. There's probably some people here who've got better things to do on their Thursday evening too. But I'd really like to encourage you to put whatever you had planned on the back burner and come and help us. Yeah, anyway, enough for ads. Wonder if it... Oh, here we go. Yep, it's working. Maybe if I stand on one foot. There we go. That's what sackcloth looks like. You know, remember those old Hessian bags that people used to get stuff in? So, same sort of stuff. Sitting in sackcloth and dousing himself with ashes. Why? Because last week, the last thing we realised was that a plan had gone ahead for killing all of the Jews within the Persian Empire, starting in Susa, but the message had gone out into the whole of the Persian Empire from Susa. And we were left with a couple of quandaries. First of all, there was a lot of confusion at this point because the Jewish people were a bit like that family from Billawheeler. They'd been in their society contributing and getting involved in the empire. And then for the king to make the edict that all of them were going to be killed on a certain day was just nuts. The Jews didn't understand it. The other Persian citizens didn't understand it. And of course, poor old Esther has been told by Mordecai, whatever you do, don't tell him you're a Jew. So Mordecai is in sackcloth and ashes. I kind of doubt anybody's got sackcloth in their wardrobe at home. I mean, ashes are fairly easy to get to. Just go out to JCU. They did burn off last night, you know. But one of the interesting things is that Mordecai says something about praying and fasting. And if you have a look in the scriptures, you'll find that there's a history of those two things going together, especially when you faced a really difficult situation. I guess it's a twofold thing. When you're fasting, and you can fast from a range of things, but the most common one is food. You are focusing. You may be reading the scriptures and spending time in prayer and really seeking God as you've never sought him before. I guess in one way, it's a sort of way of letting God know that you're serious. I mean, how many of us have, prayed prayers like, God bless Mum, God bless Dad, and God bless Grandpa, and then just want to sleep, and it just sort of rolls off the tongue when we're little kids. And we sometimes carry that into our adult lives. When was the last time that you poured your heart and soul into your prayer? We prayed for Kelsey today. She has shingles. Hand up those who have had shingles. Hand up. Keep your hand up if you know it's an absolute bugger. Pardon the language. I have heard so too. I have not experienced it. Apparently it's something akin to chicken pox. It's the same virus that causes the thing. And those of us who have had chicken pox as kids, it tends to remain in the system and can come back, especially under times of stress and whatever. Now, we prayed for her this morning, but I wonder in the quietness of our own homes and whatever, how many of us are going to truly pour out our hearts and speak to God about that issue. for her, or whether we'll just offer the glib prayers that we often, as Christians, offer. Now, Mordecai, he tells people to fast and pray. And even in the palace, Esther and all of her attendants are fasting and praying. They are pouring out their hearts to God as if it was a matter of life and death. Oh, hang on. It was a matter of life and death. So I think there's something to be recaptured in the Christian life about really putting other things aside and to focus on prayer, focus on seeking God for a period. Now, the longest sorts of times of fasting and praying tended to have been around about 40 days. Jesus talks about praying and fasting. He also gives instructions about how people should fast. I have been in some churches at times where it's almost a badge of honour if they've been fasting. And they want to tell you all about it. I'm doing another 40-day fast, as if they wanted brownie points for it. Jesus actually teaches about this and says it's not about getting brownie points. In fact, nobody should even know that you're fasting and praying from the outside. It's what you do on the inside. And but I wonder whether there is something to be said for the kind of serious getting down to prayer. Now, when I arrived here, this church was called House of Praise. There have been numerous times when I was convinced that it should be a house of prayer. Remember what Jesus said to people who turned the outer courts of the temple into a place of buying and selling, and he says, "This is my Father's house of prayer, but you've turned it into a den of thieves." The gathering place of God's people is meant to be a house of prayer. And so not only do I wonder whether we would actually gain something from some serious periods of intense prayer as the people of God, but I think as a general process, God will only take us so far without some kind of indication of how serious we are. How many folks did we have at prayer on Friday night, Graham? Yeah. Do you remember how many we had? We're out the back. So, that's not doing too bad. When we think about out of the whole congregation. But, I'm just. G'day, David. Come and have a pew somewhere. Oh, that line actually works here, doesn't it? Clicky thing doesn't seem to work today. Sorry? Yeah. Okay. The picture on the right is meant to represent a eunuch who, on the left. My apologies. And so what we've got is these people, including the eunuchs and all of her maids and whatever, they're all praying and fasting. I suspect they know what her ethnic background is. And there's Mordecai. He's been fasting and praying as well. There are some things that you just have no power to deal with. This is not coffee, this is just hot water, because I've been coughing since halfway through yesterday. There's nothing that you can do about some situations that you have. As powerful as you think you are, there are some things that are outside your power to deal with. When I met a guy yesterday who was down working in Stanford, near where Colleen Connect lives, and he was telling me a little bit about how that fire started and stuff. But the mayors of the Darling Downs area were between a rock and a hard place. They just simply couldn't. The fireys could not get that fire under control. And so the mayors, what did they call for? Prayer. Because people in Australia, despite the fact that we're not all that churchy as a group, we know that there's only one thing you can do in certain circumstances when you have no control over a situation, and that is to pray, hoping that God will be in control. I think we've already established that God is in control whether we think he is or not anyway. And this is what happens. People go, okay, as a last resort, we'll pray. And certainly the people in this story were at the point of last resort. There was nothing that could be done. Now, eventually, Esther is given permission to talk to the king by Mordecai. Mordecai finally says, okay, it's time. In fact, that was the thing that they were especially preparing for in their fasting and praying, because you see, it was very simple. I'm just going to pretend Buddy is the king. If I approached the king without him holding out his scepter to me, he would be quite within his rights to have me killed. Doesn't matter whether I'm the queen or not, you don't approach the king without being asked. Are you the king? I don't think so. Although sometimes he thinks he is. Sometimes he tries to rule the household. Yes, you. And look, the fact that Esther's the queen means very little. Consider what happened to his old queen. All right? The thing is, if his queen displeased him, it would have been, right, get rid of that one. We tried her for a few months, didn't work, we'll go and get another one. And so, really, being the queen didn't make any difference. So Esther is praying that she can approach the king, and there was this traditional thing where if you approached the king and then he extended his scepter towards you, you were safe. And so she goes and she approaches the king and he puts his scepter out and she's okay. We've talked about the fasting and praying. So where is God? Because remember we said that this is the book of the Bible that doesn't even mention God. And yet it mentions prayer. I'm not doing anything, Jason. I'm just standing here. The microphone has got a mind of its own. It's the lead, yeah. So who does one fast for and pray to? But God's not actually mentioned, but by implication. Thank you very much. You are such a master at those Englishy words. Thank you, sir. The implication is that God is there, but he's not mentioned. Very much like today, where people go, well, pray for rain, even though we don't actually talk about God, but we assume that that's an okay thing to do when you're between a rock and a hard place. And of course, these guys were between a rock and a hard place because the king had made the edict, and according to the traditions or the laws of the Medes and Persians, that ruling could not be countermanded, even by the same person who made it. So, if the king said, off with Trevor's head, I'm sick of his English stuff. As long as you don't speak to me with that outrageous French accent. Just been watching too much Monty Python. I have no idea. Oh yeah, if it was cutting off your head, there is nothing. Even if I have to change my mind later, my edict stands. I can't go back on it, and that's the difficulty that we have here. How is God, by implication, going to change this so that the Jewish people, but especially Esther, Queen of Persia, how does God fix this so that ultimately it will be okay without being able to overturn the original decision? And so at this point, not only are we saying, well, there's no mention of God, where is God in this thing? But there's an assumption that he's there behind the scenes somewhere because they're praying. I want to finish with some other thinking around this idea of where is God. This was one of the questions, of course, that was asked by people during the Holocaust, Jewish people. Where is God? And a range of Christian thinkers have also thought about this. And I quite like C.S. Lewis's thinking about this particular thing, so I thought I would mention it. This is Lewis speaking. Go to him when your need is desperate, when all other help is vain, and what do you find? A door slammed in your face, and a sound of bolting and double bolting on the inside, and then after that, silence. You may as well turn away. The longer you wait, the more emphatic the silence will become. There are no lights in the windows. It might be an empty house. Was it ever inhabited? Now, that sounds rather gloomy, doesn't it? C.S. Lewis is a very interesting fellow. He got married quite late in life to an American lady. He basically got married to her in order for her to be able to stay in England. His stepson is the person who is the executive producer of all those Narnia films that have come out in the last few years. A little bit after they married, she contracted bone cancer. They discovered it when she was walking into the room and her femur broke, just under normal stress. And off she went to hospital, and then came the diagnosis. And so very soon he was left a widower, looking after this stepson as a solo dad. And he tried to deal with issues of grief in his thinking, because he was in this situation of praying to God when his need was desperate, and this was his experience. There was a silence. C.S. Lewis, in some ways, is a little bit of a Job kind of character, though. Despite being able to put into words the feelings that accompanied this sense of God not being there, he maintained his faith in God in the midst of that. He wrote a book. I forget what its exact title was, but it was something along the lines of All About Joy. And he wrote it during his period of grieving. By the way, the name of his wife was Joy. It was a play on words, yeah. Mr. Jason, I wonder if you could find Psalm 139 while everybody is diving for Psalm 139 in their Bibles. Because one of the things that I think we've forgotten in modern day Christianity is we've forgotten to be real about the downsides or the difficult times that we encounter in our Christian walk. Let's face it, the modern Christian church at Easter time would rather spend a lot of time remembering the resurrection, but not too much time considering the crucifixion. And yet, Paul in his letters doesn't dwell on one to the exclusion of the other. And the psalmists did not dwell on the good side of faith in God at the expense of the bad side. Because the psalmists basically tell about life like it is. They express sadness and sorrow and all of that stuff, knowing that God's got broad shoulders, he can cope. He would much rather you be honest with him than dwell in fairyland and just trying to convince yourself and other people that everything's going to be hunky-dory and there's never going to be any suffering and never any grief. And yet, there will be one day when there will be no more suffering. There'll be no more pain. We have that promise to us in the book of Revelation. But that's not yet. Between now and then, there'll be stuff that really is not very pleasant. That will be part of our experience. And there will be times when we feel as if God has abandoned us. I'm going to get you to read this with me. You ready? Mm-hmm. Yahweh, you have searched me and you know me. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize. I didn't realize I had the power. You know my sitting down and my rising up. You perceive my thoughts from afar. You search out my path and my lying down and are acquainted with all my ways. For there is not a word on my tongue, but behold, Yahweh, you know it altogether. You hem me in from behind and before. You laid your hand on me. This knowledge is beyond me. It's lofty. I can't attain it. Where could I go from your spirit? Or where could I flee from your presence? If I ascend up into heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, behold, you are there. Sheol is the place of the dead. If I take the wings of the dawn and settle in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand will lead me, and your right hand will hold me. If I say, surely the darkness will overwhelm me, the light around me will be night. Even the darkness doesn't hide from you, but the night shines as the day. The darkness is like light to you. For you formed my innermost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb. I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful, my soul knows that very well. My frame wasn't hidden from you when I was made in secret, woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my body. In your book they were all written, the days that were ordained for me, when as yet there were none of them. How precious to me are your thoughts, God. How vast is their sum. If I would count them, they are more in number than the sand. When I wake up, I am still with you. If only you, God, would kill the wicked. Get away from me, you bloodthirsty men. For they speak against you wickedly. Your enemies take your name in vain. Yahweh, don't I hate those who hate you? Am I not grieved with those who rise up against you? I hate them with perfect hatred. They have become my enemies. Search me, God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts. See if there is any wicked way in me, and lead me in the everlasting way. There's this overwhelming sense that when you think that God is not there, He's there, and the problem is that we can't cope with the silence. Have you ever been in a place where you've been having a conversation with somebody else, and then they just stop talking? It's really hard, isn't it? What's the first thing you want to do? Fill the silence. We can fill the silence as much as we like, but when God decides He's going to remain silent for a period of time, it might make us feel okay. And we fill the silence with all sorts of stuff. We fill the silence with eating, drinking and making merry. We fill the silence with music and television and stuff, whatever the stuff is. But none of it actually makes God break the silence if He doesn't want to. But just because He's remaining silent doesn't mean He's not there. I want you to imagine that something bad happens to you. Do you actually imagine that God then comes along and says, "Oh, Margaret, you could have fooled me. I really didn't see that bad thing coming. Oh, wow, I am so surprised." I mean, nobody else, other human beings will say that, going, "I just did not see that thing happening to you." But God is never surprised by that stuff. He knows what's happening, and even if he remains silent, He still knows what's going on, and He's still there, and we are still able to talk to Him in prayer. And as we finish today, in next week's episode, we find out exactly how He solves the issue of the king who's not allowed to countermand his instructions. It's quite brilliant, but then I guess what else do we expect from God? Let's pray.